I'm joined now by USC beat reporter for the LA Times, Gary Klein, and owner and publisher of USCFootball.com, Ryan Abraham. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Keely.
So let's get into it. After the loss to Oregon on Saturday, Helton said that they thought they had prepared well leading up to the game. But obviously, from what we saw, there was a disconnect between practice and the games. And we've been seeing this lately. Why do you think that is?
You know, I think you saw USC have two comeback wins against Arizona and Colorado, but didn't play all that well in those games. I think Oregon was just a much better team. Practice looked about the same to me. It looked like the preparation was there. They just hit a buzzsaw in Oregon, or it's a very hot team. Both teams were very hot, winning 4 in a row, but Oregon was definitely playing better football. So I think they practiced the same way. They just wound up playing a better opponent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think they also ran into the fact that they had two experienced linebackers out of the lineup. So you had Olajuwon Tucker, jumping in there as a sophomore who hadn't really played that much, did a pretty good job, but to jump in against Oregon and that system, that passing attack, I think was asking too much. So I wasn't surprised by the result.
So after the loss, do you think Helton is still in the running for the head coach, or do you think that USC should start looking elsewhere?
You know, it's interesting. We saw 2 years ago with Ed Orgeron, the players, there was a big groundswell of support for him. Same thing we saw with Clay Helton. There's the hashtags of support Clay Helton and all that kind of stuff. But getting beat that badly at Oregon, I think it makes it a lot tougher. A lot of the alumni that we saw were really supporting him have kind of backed off that a little bit. So I think he still has an opportunity to win the Pac-12 South and go to the Rose Bowl. So there's still something to be played for. But losing that badly at Oregon, I think it makes it a lot tougher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it definitely changes the scope of the wave of support. I think he still has it from the players. I think the fans have backed off. But Ryan, I mean, think about it. If they beat UCLA badly, and they may not, but if they beat them soundly and then they get to the Pac-12 championship game and they knock off Stanford, if they get to the Rose Bowl, if USC winds up in the Rose Bowl, I think that groundswell is going to start again, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on the administration, regarding that coaching decision.
Do you agree, do you think?
No, I completely agree, because it's the spot the administration is in right now is that there's a lot of people that want a big outside name to be hired. And if Clay Helton does do that and make this epic run, which we haven't seen a lot of evidence of that the last few weeks with the comeback wins and stuff and getting killed by Oregon, but if he's able to do that, you beat UCLA, haven't done that in 3 years, you go to the Rose Bowl, that hasn't happened since 2009, there's going to be a lot of support for him. So the players love him, and if he goes to the Rose Bowl, able to go to the Rose Bowl, the fans, I think, will love him too.
Okay, so let's say they don't go to the Rose Bowl. Obviously, the players are very vocal about their support for Helton. You mentioned Coach O. Do you risk upsetting the players again by going with another coach? It's a kind of a sticky situation.
It's a little bit, but you can't let the inmates run the asylum. There's plenty of head coaches that are, Al Golden was very popular in Miami, and they ran him out. So I think you're seeing that quite a bit around college football. Usually players do love their coach, and I think Orgeron, everyone loved him, and it probably would have worked out pretty well if they kept him. Everyone loves Clay Helton, but just because the players love him doesn't mean you should keep him.
Yeah, and I think the Oregon game really, again, changes the dynamic. A lot of groundswell for Clay Helton, the hashtags, as you mentioned. The players love him, but the administration is not going to be swayed by that. They're going to do what they think is, in the best interest of the university. Again, I think what he has to do, and he's not going to acknowledge it, he's just going to say, I'm taking care of my players and going forward, but they need to beat UCLA impressively, and they need to win the Pac-12 championship game. And I think if they do that, he's back in play at USC. Certainly, the other factor here is whether Clay Helton ends up the coach at USC or not, I think he's positioned himself for a job as a head coach somewhere.
Yeah, so you mentioned UCLA. It's going to be senior day. It's a rivalry game. It actually means something. It's for the Pac-12 South. What does USC need to do to get the win?
I think you saw over the last few years, this has been a bigger game for UCLA. USC usually has kind of sights set higher. There's a hierarchy in the Pac-12, and USC is still above that. I mean, UCLA hasn't won the Rose Bowl since 1986, so there's something to be said for that. But UCLA puts a lot of emphasis, I guess you could say, on this game. More so, I think, than USC recently. So even though the Pac-12 title is on the line, I think USC is more thinking about that as opposed to beating UCLA. I think we saw Jim Moore. They just bring it in this game, and USC is going to have to match that competitiveness to win this game.
Yeah, I think that's the big question. We were talking about it the other day. The thing that stands out for me these last few years is just the way UCLA has come out for this game. So much different than they had in the past. So physical. Just hit them in the mouth, knock them off the line, and USC has not been able to recover. Again, it's a little different dynamic this year because there is a championship at stake for the division, so maybe that's one of the things that motivates USC to finally win this game.
All right. Well, thank you two so much for coming in. We really appreciate you coming in. All right. Well, now let's toss it over to Jody to break down this historic rivalry even more.